My name is Naomi Colston. I'm 41 years old, and I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. On Mother's Day, at my mother's dining table, with the peonies I'd driven 4 hours to bring her still sitting untouched in their florist wrap, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "I wish you'd never been born." I set my napkin down, folded it once, and said, "Then let's make that true starting today." I picked up my keys and walked out of her house. 11 minutes later, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. "Bring my car back right now or I'm calling the cops on you." I read it twice, and for the first time all day, I smiled. I typed back one word. "Okay." 38 minutes after that, 2 patrol cars pulled into her cul-de-sac, light bars painting the front of a house I had quietly been paying for since 2016. And a young patrol officer with a laptop mounted on his dash was about to ask my mother a question she had spent nearly a decade hoping nobody would ever think to ask. That was only the beginning. What my mother set into motion with one phone call would end up costing this family a great deal more than a Nissan Pathfinder. By the end of that summer, nothing in any of our lives looked the same. Let me tell you what I actually do for a living, because it matters to everything that comes after. I'm a contracting officer, 19 years in uniform, 2 deployments, and a job that fits on one line. I make sure the Air Force gets what it pays for, and pays only for what it actually gets. Nobody writes country songs about acquisitions officers. When the job's done right, you never hear about us. When something breaks, we're the first name in the investigation. I made lieutenant colonel at 39, ahead of most of my peer group. The airmen who worked under me knew exactly 2 things about me: Colonel Colston keeps her word, and Colonel Colston does not show up to a meeting without a spreadsheet. That was my life on base at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. Then there was my other life, the one that ran 4 hours north to Asheville, North Carolina, where none of that discipline seemed to count for anything at all. In my family, I wasn't a contracting officer. I wasn't really a daughter, either, not in the way the word usually means. I was infrastructure. The reliable one. The one you called when the transmission blew or the property tax bill came due or the card got declined buying groceries. It took me most of 2 decades to understand the shape of that pattern, and I want to be honest about why it took so long. I liked being depended on. In the Air Force, being the person everyone counts on is the entire point. I carried that instinct home with me and mistook it for love. Every supply chain has a breaking point. It just needs enough weight, applied long enough, and mine had a date on it, though I didn't know that yet. It landed on the 2nd Sunday of May, a table set for 5, and a pan of cornbread going cold between my mother and me. It started, the way these things usually do, with a funeral. My father died in 2011, when I was a 26-year-old first lieutenant stationed clear across the country. He'd run a small auto body shop and never once raised his rates on anyone who couldn't pay, and he left behind a grieving wife, a mortgage that was 2 payments behind, and a folder of medical bills he'd been hiding in his workbench. My brother Curtis was 30 then, living 20 minutes from Mom. When the bills came due, he said the sentence he would keep saying for the next 14 years. "I'm in between things right now, Naomi, but once I'm settled." Things never settled, so I did what a logistics officer does when a position is about to collapse. I set up a direct allotment straight out of my paycheck into my mother's account before I ever saw the money myself. I ate off base cafeteria food for 2 years and told myself it was temporary. Here's the detail I want you to sit with, because I sat with it for a very long time. In all those years, my mother never once asked what I was living on. Never asked what I'd given up on my end of that transfer, whether there was a relationship, a house, a life. The calls only ever ran one direction. "Naomi, the transmission. Naomi, your brother's behind again. Naomi, can you?" I told myself I was holding the family together. I believed it the way you believe anything you repeat to yourself in the dark, alone. The truth was simpler and colder, and it took me 14 years to say it out loud, even to myself. I wasn't holding my family together. I was teaching them exactly what I was for. In 2016, my mother's landlord sold the duplex she'd rented for 11 years, and she called me at midnight, crying, convinced she'd end up in some apartment complex off the interstate. I was 31 by then, a captain, freshly home from a deployment to Qatar, and I had spent 5 years saving the way only someone living out of a chew can save. There isn't much to spend a paycheck on in the middle of a desert. So in the fall of that year, I bought a house. A modest 3-bedroom brick ranch on a quiet street in Weaverville, just outside Asheville, with a screened porch and a dogwood tree by the mailbox. $980 a month in mortgage, taxes handled automatically from an account in Georgia, paid for by a woman who would sleep in that house maybe 8 nights a year. The deed said Naomi R. Colston. The keys went to my mother. I stood in that empty kitchen on moving day, still slightly in shock from my own savings account, and watched my mother turn a slow circle with her hand pressed to her chest. Finally, she said, "A house of my own. Not thank you. Not I'll pay you back when I can. A house of her own." I opened my mouth to correct her and closed it again. That silence turned out to be the single most expensive thing I have ever purchased, because a story got planted in that kitchen that afternoon, and stories grow faster than dogwoods. Within a year, the whole street knew it as Vivian's house. The ladies at her church prayed blessings over Vivian's home. Curtis told his friends our mother owned it outright. Exactly 3 people on earth knew whose name actually sat on that deed at the county register of deeds. 2 of them worked very hard to forget it. Come May, everyone on that street was going to learn it in a single evening. People ask how a 41-year-old lieutenant colonel lets herself get bled for the better part of 2 decades, and the answer is always the same: one reasonable-sounding request at a time. Nobody ever asks you for 14 years of your life in one sitting. They ask for a roof. The roof was $11,800 after a windstorm tore through Weaverville in 2018, and Mom couldn't very well live under a blue tarp. They asked for a hip replacement co-pay my mother's insurance wouldn't fully cover. Bail money for Curtis, exactly once, which is what everyone always says the first time. Then gas money for Curtis monthly, which nobody even pretended was a loan by year 2. A new furnace. New brakes on Mom's car, twice. And every single time I paid, my mother said the same sentence: warm as a casserole dish and just as final. That's what family does. She said it the way other people say grace. There was exactly one person in that house who ever treated me like something more than a line of credit, and she was born after I was already commissioned. My niece Kayla, Curtis's daughter, the only Colston who ever once sent a handwritten thank you note. When I mailed her a laptop for her sophomore year, she wrote me 2 pages about what she wanted to study one day. I kept that letter the way other women keep love letters. Here's the part one never told a single soul, though. In 9 years of owning that house, I never once spent a Christmas Eve sleeping under its roof. There was never a room set aside for me. I slept on the pull-out sofa under a framed print of a lighthouse nobody in our family had ever actually seen in person, and I drove back to Georgia before the leftovers were even put away. I paid for every square foot of that house. I just never got to keep one for myself. In 2023, I finally bought something for me, a slate gray Pathfinder, paid off in full within 8 months, because debt with my name attached is a thing I do not carry lightly, for reasons that will become obvious. In early 2025, the Air Force sent me to a 9-month assignment supporting logistics at a base in Germany, and I made what I thought was a practical decision. I left the Pathfinder in the garage at the Weaverville house instead of paying for long-term storage, and asked that it be started once a week to keep the battery alive. When I flew home that winter, the SUV had 7,400 new miles on it, a seat position that fit nobody in our family but Curtis, an air freshener I never bought hanging off the mirror, and a new name. Mom's car, she told the neighbor across the fence, breezy as small talk. Naomi's overseas, so I've just been using it. I want to be clear about what I did next, because I wasn't reckless about it and I need you to understand that. I didn't raise my voice. I did paperwork. The title had always stayed in my personal safe back on base. Registration, my name. Insurance, my name and my Georgia address. I had a spare key cut, and when my leave ended, I drove that SUV back to Georgia myself. You'd have thought I stole a church bus. Curtis called me petty to 3 separate cousins. Mom didn't speak to me for 9 days, which, honestly, were the most peaceful 9 days I'd had in years. In the Air Force, we'd call what I did continuity of accountability. On my mother's street, they called it, what Naomi did to her own mother. Fine. The car was an annoyance, and annoyances I can live with. What I found 5 weeks before Mother's Day was something else entirely. Officers with a security clearance live under something called continuous evaluation, a quiet, standing program that flags anything unusual in your financial and legal records year-round. Debt is the single biggest red flag in that system, because unmanaged debt is exactly what makes a person vulnerable to being compromised. On a Tuesday afternoon in late March, an automated alert landed in my inbox with a subject line that made my coffee go cold. A delinquent account had been flagged under my social security number. A credit card I had never opened. 7 months old. Maxed out at $9,600 and in collections. Statements mailed to a house in Weaverville, North Carolina. I didn't panic. I did what I do. I called the card issuer on my lunch break, froze everything, filed a dispute, and requested the full charge history. The fraud department was sympathetic in the vague, procedural way fraud departments always are, and told me that to clear a debt this size against a named suspect, they'd want a police report and a signed identity theft affidavit. Then the charge history came through, and I sat in my parked car outside the Squadron building and read it line by line, the way you read a casualty report. A tire shop in Asheville. An auto parts chain, repeatedly. A steakhouse. 3 separate charges at a casino 2 hours away in Cherokee. And the very first purchase, on the very first day, 7 months earlier, while I was 6 time zones away in Germany, was a set of 4 truck tires. I sat there a long moment with my thumb resting on that line. I already knew exactly whose truck those tires belonged to. That Saturday, I drove up to Weaverville with a folder, because I bring folders to fights I intend to win. I sat my brother down at the kitchen table in the house I owned, and I laid the charge history out in front of him. I watched Curtis run through his entire repertoire, confusion, offense, wounded pride, before landing, as he always eventually lands, on entitlement. I was gonna pay it off before you ever noticed, he said. It's basically family money anyway. You weren't even in the country to use it. My mother didn't ask him a single question. She turned on me instead. She actually lowered herself onto her knees on the kitchen tile, 64 years old, gripping the sleeve of my jacket. You'd send your own brother to prison. Your own blood, Naomi. On my knees. I'm begging you. Here is what I did, and you're welcome to judge me for either half of it. I did not call the police that day. I also did not accept another promise. I wrote out a plain English agreement at that table. Curtis admitted to opening the card. Curtis owed $9,600. Curtis had 30 days to make a first payment and agree to a schedule. If he did, I told the bank I couldn't identify a suspect and let it end there. He signed it with my own pen, smirking faintly, like a teenager signing a detention slip. My mother stood behind him with a hand on his shoulder, like they were posing for a family portrait. The deadline was the first Monday in May. It came and went. No payment. No call. Nothing at all from anyone in North Carolina. And on the second Sunday of May, I got up before sunrise and drove 4 hours north for Mother's Day anyway. Write that down as the last installment of hope I had left to spend. I was on the road before 5 in the morning, because if you leave Robbins by 5, you make Asheville by lunch with time to stop for flowers. I bought peonies. My mother grew peonies at the old duplex when I was a girl, back before Dad died and money was still simple. Every year since, I buy them for her, and every year I watch her set them somewhere out of the way. In the back seat sat a photo album I'd spent 2 evenings printing and assembling, 20-some years of Colston's, ending with a picture of Mom on the screen porch I'd paid to rebuild. When I pulled up, Curtis was already on the front steps with a beer at 11:30, and he looked at my Pathfinder the way a man looks at an ex he's not over. My Aunt Renee's sedan sat in the driveway. Through the window I could see her in the kitchen, stirring something, keeping her head down like she already knew what kind of afternoon this was going to be. Kayla met me on the walkway and hugged me hard enough to crack a rib, whispering, "I'm glad you came, Aunt Naomi." Inside, my mother was holding court. She unwrapped Curtis's gift first, a picture frame, drugstore price sticker still on the back, and pressed it to her chest like it was heirloom silver. My peonies went on the counter by the sink, still in their paper. Fine. I hadn't driven 4 hours for flower placement. I'd driven up with one sentence in my pocket, rehearsed and sanded down smooth, a quiet question for my brother, meant for after the pie, no scene, no audience. Just an honest answer that had been owed to me for over a month. I never got to dessert. We made it through the pork roast and green beans on the strength of Aunt Renee's weather commentary alone. Then the plates slowed, and I looked across the table at my brother and asked it low and level, the same tone I'd use asking a subordinate why a shipment was 3 days late. Your 30 days ran out last Monday, Curtis. Where are we? That was all. No raised voice. No folder on the table. No courtroom flourish. Curtis's fork stopped halfway. Kayla went still beside me. And my mother came up out of her chair like I'd flipped the table itself. You will not do this today, she said. At my table. On my day. Mom, it's a question. Not an accusation. That was gasoline. She called me ungrateful. She said I'd been keeping score my whole life like a bank, like a bill collector, and she reached for the worst word she had, like a stranger. She said Curtis had struggles I couldn't understand because the military had made me hard, and that a real daughter lifts her family up instead of dragging them into the light to count their sins. I sat there with both hands flat on either side of my plate, and I watched my mother's face go somewhere I had genuinely never seen it go before, some final door finally swinging open. She looked me dead in the eye across a bouquet of peonies somebody had finally moved to the table, and she said it. I wish you'd never been born. The clock over the hutch ticked twice. Aunt Renee stared into her green beans. Curtis studied the ceiling, one thumb tapping his beer bottle, a man watching whether he was certain would never rain on him. I stood up. I folded my napkin once and set it beside my plate, corners squared, the way I square everything in my life. Then let's make that true starting today, I said. And I picked up my keys, and walked out of my mother's favorite holiday. I made it 11 minutes down the highway before the phone lit up on the passenger seat. I pulled into a gas station to read it, because I don't text and drive, and I wasn't about to risk my life over this family. All caps. My mother's thumbs. Bring my car back right now or I'm calling the cops on you. I sat there in the driver's seat of a vehicle I'd paid for entirely with deployment money, and I reached over and opened the glove box, where the registration and insurance card sat in a plastic sleeve, both bearing the name Naomi R. Colston and a Georgia address. Something in my chest went very quiet and very level, the way it does right before a difficult briefing. I typed back one word. Okay. Then I did what I do. I called my insurance company's after-hours line and confirmed the policyholder of record on file, just to have the timestamp on record. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. 19 minutes later, the phone rang. Kayla, breathless, whispering from somewhere in the house. Aunt Naomi, she actually did it. She called 911 and told them you stole her car. Dad's out on the porch yelling at the whole street and he's been drinking since noon. Can you come back, please? I looked at the registration pouch sitting on the passenger seat where my peonies should have been. I'm coming, I said. But understand me, kiddo. I'm not coming back to apologize. The registered owner should probably be present when her own property gets reported stolen. Call it professional courtesy. The first patrol car was already at the curb when I turned back onto her street, light bar washing across the porch where my mother stood with her arms crossed like a woman waiting on a valet. Curtains up and down the block hung at that careful half-open angle. I parked across the street, legal and calm, and rolled my window down in time to hear the young officer, Deakins, by his name tape, reading my plate back to dispatch off his shoulder mic. He'd already run it before he ever knocked on her door. That's the part nobody tells you about reporting a car stolen. The very first thing an officer does is ask the system whose car it actually is. Ma'am, Deacon said to my mother, patient as gravel, this vehicle comes back registered to a Naomi Colston. Is that you? That's my daughter. It's the family car. She took it. Is your name on the title, ma'am? My mother, I will remember this until the day I die, waved a hand at the whole street, at the house, at the SUV idling across the road, and said, everything here is family. We don't divide things up with paper. I could have told him that sentence was coming. It was the family constitution, recited word for word. That's when Curtis banged out through the storm door with a fresh beer and a month's worth of grievances, jabbing a finger at the officer, announcing to the whole street and God that this was harassment and his sister thought she was better than everybody. Deakins keyed his mic and asked for a second unit, in that flat tone that means paperwork has officially begun. I stepped out, crossed the street, and held out my military ID, the registration, and my phone, open to a photo of the title I kept in my safe on base. Deakins looked at each one, looked at my mother, looked back at me. "Colonel," he said, "would you mind stepping over by my car? This shouldn't take long." The second unit ran everybody's names off the porch, because that's standard procedure once a scene gets loud, and that's how Mother's Day ended with my brother in handcuffs, though calling it my doing gives me too much credit. It turned out Curtis had picked up a DUI back in February and skipped his court date in March. There was an active bench warrant sitting in the system like a landmine with his name on it, and not one person in my family had breathed a word of it to me. A third cruiser rolled up to assist, and the street got a better show than the 4th of July. Curtis Colston, 41 years old, protesting his way down his mother's front steps in an untucked shirt while an officer recited numbers at him. And here is the moment I want you to hold on to. My mother did not scream at the police. She screamed at me. "Do something. You're a colonel, you know people. Do something, Naomi." Even then, even with her own son in cuffs on her own lawn, from her own phone call, I was still not her daughter. I was her asset, and she was demanding a withdrawal. Deakins wrote my mother a formal warning about false reporting and explained slowly, the way you explain something twice, that the vehicle had always been mine, and that the next fabricated call would not end with a warning. Then he walked me back to my car and lowered his voice. "Colonel, anything else we should know tonight?" I looked at the porch, at my mother shrinking under the yellow bug light, at Kayla's pale face behind the storm door glass. The $9,600 answer sat right there behind my teeth. "Not tonight," I said. I checked into a motel off I-26 with my mother's voice still ringing in my ears, and some quiet, methodical part of me already reaching for a legal pad. Here's what a contracting officer does when the world goes sideways: she takes inventory. I sat cross-legged on a bedspread the color of weak tea, laptop open, banking portal glowing, and I started pulling statements. Not out of spite, out of a need to see the whole battlefield clearly, because I'd been navigating this family blind for 14 years, and my mother had just told me exactly what she thought I was worth. Autopay mortgage, 2016 to present. Autopay utilities. The 4-line family phone plan, of which I used exactly 1 line. Transfers with memo lines like roof and furnace and just this once. Around midnight, Kayla texted. "Grandma's on the phone telling everyone you sent the cops to arrest Dad. Aunt Renee's over there. Nobody's asking what actually happened. I was there. I'll tell anyone who asks the truth." I looked at that for a long time. 20 years old, and the only witness in that house who thought the truth was worth typing out. I wrote back, "You don't have to pick a side, kiddo. That's not your job. 3 dots. Then, you never had anyone on yours. Now you do." I set the phone face down, because a lieutenant colonel does not cry over a text message in a motel room. I went back to the statements. Month after month, all of it flowing one direction, like blood from a wound nobody sews shut because everyone's too polite to mention the knife. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, I reached for the notepad by the phone. In the Air Force, after enough contact, you stop narrating the engagement and start counting the cost. I had a number by sunrise. At daybreak, I drove to a drugstore and bought a pack of index cards, because some numbers deserve better than motel notepaper. Back in the room, I spread it all across the bedspread: the mortgage since 2016, the roof, the furnace, the 2 sets of brakes, the bail, the monthly gas money nobody had pretended was a loan since year 2, dozens of unlabeled transfers. I added it up twice. Then I took a pencil and wrote 1 number on 1 card, because this story doesn't work without it. $184,000. Give or take the kindness I forgot to log. 9 years of it. And the fraud card wasn't even in that total. That $9,600 belonged in a different column entirely. The column of things taken, not given. The fact that my family had needed both columns was its own kind of diagnosis. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, waiting to feel something clean. Righteousness, maybe. Instead, a question crawled up out of that number and sat down across from me, and it wasn't a question about them. What exactly had I been buying? Because $184,000 isn't the cost of a roof or a furnace or bail. It's the cost of a seat at a table you were convinced you weren't born with one at. I slid the card behind my military ID, where I keep the things I might one day have to answer for. Then I checked the clock. It was Monday. The bank had wanted my signature 5 weeks ago. Today they were finally going to get it. The Weaverville police substation smelled like burnt coffee and toner, which I mean is a compliment. It smells like things getting written down. I sat across from a detective named Osei, unhurried, reading glasses pushed up on his head, and filed the report I'd been sitting on for 5 weeks. Identity theft. Fraudulent account. $9,600. At the line marked suspect, if known, I didn't write unknown. I printed my brother's full legal name in block letters, the way I write incident reports, because block letters keep your hand from shaking. I handed Osei the charge history, my deployment orders showing 9 months in Germany while the account was opened and used, and the agreement Curtis had signed at my kitchen table, admitting the debt in his own handwriting. Osei read that last page twice and looked up over his glasses. He signed this. He did. Colonel, in this building, we call that a gift. I was in the parking lot when Aunt Renee called and skipped hello entirely. Vivian told me what you did. A police report, Naomi. Family doesn't call the police on family. I watched a cardinal hop across the hood of my car. That car. Renee, I said, Mom called the police on me first. Over a vehicle I own. You were there for that dinner. Ask Kayla about the rest. Silence did some arithmetic on the other end. If you go through with this, you're going to lose every single person in this family. They'll shut you out. All of us. And for the second time in 2 days, the answer came out of me level and unhurried, like it had been standing at attention my whole life waiting for the order. Okay. That afternoon, from a corner table in the motel lobby, I decommissioned a 14-year-old supply line, item by item, the way we do everything in my line of work, with a checklist. Utilities at the Weaverville house switched to a 30-day notice for occupants to establish their own accounts. The 4-line phone plan, down to 1, mine. The shared credit card, closed and paid in full. Curtis's monthly gas transfer, cancelled with 2 taps on a screen. I want to tell you those 2 taps felt momentous. They didn't. 9 years, gone in an afternoon, and the phone didn't even get warm. The one thing I did not touch was the mortgage. People assume that's the first thing you'd cut, and it would have been the dumbest. My house. My deed. My credit. You don't burn your own bridge just because other people are standing on it. I kept paying for the house exactly as before. What ended was everything that had made living in it free. By Wednesday, Kayla reported Curtis was out on bond, telling anyone with ears that his sister had gone nuclear over a misunderstanding. My mother had begun a phone campaign through the extended family and the church directory, and in her version, I was a cold, decorated stranger punishing a widow for loving her son too much. I didn't answer any of it. I had one more envelope to send, and it was going certified. Tuesday morning I signed 2 copies of a 30-day notice to vacate, one addressed to my mother, one to my brother, occupants of a single-family home on Larkspur Lane, Weaverville, North Carolina. Owner of record, Naomi R. Colston. My attorney, a Asheville real estate lawyer named Renata Cho with a handshake like a filing cabinet closing, walked me through it without blinking. They're occupants at will. No lease, no rental history. 30 days written is the clean way. If they refuse, we file for eviction and it goes in front of a judge, could be 6, 8 more weeks. North Carolina doesn't put anyone on the curb overnight, and neither will you. Good, I said. I've waited 14 years. I can do the next 60 by the book. She looked at me a moment. Most people in your chair want it done angry. Angry is expensive, I said. I already paid retail. The certified mail cards came back with 2 signatures I'd known my whole life, and then the phone truly began. Cousins I hadn't heard from since my father's funeral. A deacon from Mom's church, gentle and fishing for information. In my mother's telling, which traveled the family the way fire travels dry grass, I had abandoned a helpless widow, weaponized the police, and stolen her home out from under her. Notice the architecture of that sentence. Her home. 9 years of my direct deposits, and the story had swallowed the deed whole. I didn't correct a single person, because you cannot win a story war against the woman who taught you how to talk. I had documents. She had the narrative. And only one of those two things holds up in a courtroom, which was the only room I still planned on visiting. Midweek, Detective Osei called with the flat carefulness of a man delivering someone else's nonsense. Your brother came in with a public defender. His statement is that you authorized the card, that the family shares money all the time, and this is a bookkeeping dispute you're weaponizing over a fight at dinner. I stood in the motel parking lot and laughed once, with no joy in it. Of course. The family constitution again, recited to a detective. The account was opened in September, I said. From September through May, I was on assignment in Germany. I've already sent you the orders. The first charge was truck tires purchased on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was standing in a briefing room outside Ramstein. There are 3 casino charges I can match against duty rosters. And he signed a written admission of the debt in April, which you're already holding, before he'd ever heard the word, detective. Osei was quiet a beat, and I could hear him smile through the phone. I do love a client who brings her own file, Colonel. For what it's worth, his story fell apart in the first 10 minutes. This is moving. I hung up and stood in the spring air feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. 19 years of service, and this was the first time the Air Force's own paperwork had ever deployed on my behalf in a family war. My orders, of all things. The proof I wasn't there. The record of my entire adult life, finally useful for something other than paying for other people's. 9 people sat around my Aunt Renee's dining table that Sunday, and my mother wasn't one of them, which told me the real purpose of the meeting before anyone opened their mouth. This was the negotiating team. My cousin Dale cleared his throat and read off a legal pad what the family had quietly worked out among themselves. I would withdraw my statement to the police, tear up the eviction notice, let Mom and Curtis stay in the house, like always, and Curtis would repay me, as he's able. In exchange, Mom would forgive me for Mother's Day and welcome me back into the family. Heads nodded around the table at the fairness of it. Aunt Renee reached over and squeezed my wrist. You've always been the strong one, honey. That's what family is for. There it was. The motto, offered with love, by the last blood ally I had, at the exact moment she stopped being one. I reached into my jacket for my wallet, and I watched the whole table relax, 9 people loosening an inch, because the wallet coming out had always been this family's happy ending. I let my thumb rest on the index card behind my ID, $184,000, in pencil. I left it where it was. I closed the wallet, and I stood. No, I said. Just that. Thank you for the coffee, Dale. 9 people watched me walk out, and my phone was already buzzing. Kayla, 3 missed calls. She'd been at the house helping her grandmother start packing, and in the hall closet, under old wrapping paper, she'd found a shoebox. She FaceTimed me from the driveway with it open on the hood of her car. Money order receipts, hundreds of them, rubber banded by decade, $50 a month, made out to my mother's own mother going back over 30 years. That evening, Aunt Renee, subdued since the family summit, filled in what I'd never known.